How would you evaluate the season, Neil?
I guess I'll say the same thing everybody else said. It was up and down. It ebbed and flowed. Disappointed in the way it finished, probably the way it started. Look, I think based on expectations, I think the first 50 games were a major disappointment for everybody. I think on a team basis, it was disappointing. I think individually, we just finished exit interviews. I think all the players were kind of disappointed with the start that we had. I think they had higher expectations for themselves as well as a team. But thankfully, we were able to kind of, pull it out the last, 25, 30 games and salvage a season that had much higher expectations coming into it. There's two ways to look at it. Do we bemoan the fact that for the first 50 games, we weren't the team we wanted to be, or do we take some solace in where we were post All-Star break, about what this roster is capable of when it's locked in and it plays with the kind of urgency we had seen the year before?
Neil, how would you describe your flexibility or position moving forward to improve this roster?
It's interesting, Jason. I think this is the first summer we haven't had cap room, since I've been here. A couple of times it was strategic, that we had it, and a couple of times it was based on the departures of, guys that, we had looked to re-sign initially. So, I think a lot of the growth of the roster is going to come internally. We had the youngest team in the league this year. We had the youngest team in the playoffs for the second year in a row. So I think we have to grow internally too. But the 3 draft picks, we moved the Cleveland pick into this year. That was done strategically, knowing we weren't going to have as many resources in terms of, cap room or exceptions. So the 3 draft picks give us a lot of flexibility, not just in acquiring players through the draft, but as tools to get deals done. It's why we were so aggressive to try and add an additional pick. I think, this draft has taken on almost mythic proportions. I don't know if the reality is going to live up to it, but, we have multiple teams that don't have a pick in this draft. We have teams that maybe aren't selecting in the range they want to be selecting in. And, some teams that are maybe in a different place than we are in terms of maybe a rebuild where draft picks are more valuable, that would look to convey players that can help immediately for players that they can play the futures game with. So I think we'll probably have to be more creative than we've had to in the past, Jace. I think we're going to have to utilize the draft picks. I think we're going to have to, take a look at some of the guys on the roster, obviously, and see where we have redundancies, where we need upgrades. Clearly we have guys on this roster that are capable of playing a very, very high level of basketball that can get us where we all want to go. And we need to evaluate, are there guys on the roster that maybe, aren't ready for that kind of responsibility, and do we need to find upgrades at their positions?
Could you break down the tools you do have in free agency as a team?
We don't have any. We have the taxpayer mid-level.
So one taxpayer mid-level.
Yeah, that's it right now, yep.
And we asked him in camp, but could you relay Paul's feelings on going into the tax and being a repeater and all that stuff?
Well, honestly, we don't talk as specifically about the tax. I think that just becomes a catch-all, for people separating tax teams, non-tax teams, right? Cap teams, cap room teams. With Paul, we're very lucky. The economics very rarely play into any of this. He wants the best team on the floor. He wants to retain as much talent as possible. I think we saw that last summer. I think some of the contracts that we gave out or matched were contracts as rewards for performance, and some were, player retention. Paul wants to keep as much talent on this roster and give this group the best chance it has to compete. And, I said when I came here, I'd come from a situation where, not to sound trite, but winning was a byproduct of profit. And when I interviewed with Paul and when I came here, I said I wanted to be someplace where profit was a byproduct of winning. And winning was always going to come first, and keeping players and being aggressive and making trades. And very rarely, if ever, does a conversation about the economics factor into if it's the best basketball decision for the organization. And, that's something we're all very lucky to have here with Paul, that he's always going to put the team, the roster, and the organization first before the checkbook.
When you acquired Yusuf, the talk seemed to be about getting the draft pick, and it quickly shifted to getting this 22-year-old kid who could really play.
Right.
How much did the way he played in those 21 games change the sort of trajectory going forward?
Well, look, it clearly fills a hole. Look, Mace is an unbelievable kid. He's a really good player. The timing, of his contract was going to be something that, was going to, give us pause. And, quite honestly, I think, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. I think if we had gotten off to a better start, maybe we're not as aggressive in pursuing that deal. So it really gave us an opportunity. I think at the time, Terry and the coaches and some of the players looked at it like it was a shift in direction because we were giving up such a known quantity for an unknown. Nurk had missed his second year in the league. He wasn't playing a lot. He was something of a distressed asset. But that's kind of our job. Myself, Steve Rosenberry, Bill Branch, Joe Cronin, our job is to kind of, see the forest for the trees, per se, and understand that we've got to constantly acquire talent with the highest ceiling possible to give them the best chance to compete. And what we had to kind of dispel was comfort over success. And it really what it is, it got us out of our comfort zone. It shook things up a little bit. And I think it got a lot of the guys on the roster understanding the status quo wasn't going to be good enough. We weren't just going to kind of go through the motions for the rest of the season and hope we were going to turn the season around. We needed some external motivation and incentive to instill a little bit of a new spirit in what was happening. And, look, I think we felt, I'm not going to sit here and tell you we knew Nurk was going to do what he did and they were going to have folk songs written about him in Bosnia or anything else. But we also know when you looked at his advanced numbers, this was a guy capable of averaging a double-double if given the opportunity. Tim Connolly and his staff did an unbelievable job. They not only found Yusuf Nurkic, they found a guy who beat out Yusuf Nurkic, through the draft, middle of the first and late second. So they did their part, but, we've seen it on our roster. There's times you've got to give guys up. We all knew how talented Will Barton was, but we were trying to make an upgrade at the time, and we had Alan Crabb, we had Wes, we had CJ, and I think that's the situation they ended up in. But we were well aware of his talent. I don't think anybody was aware of how easily and seamlessly Terry was able to fit him into our system and how quickly his teammates were going to embrace him.
How does his emergence, how does that change the trajectory of what you will do this offseason, or how does it change your summer?
Well, we're not looking for a center. Quite honestly, look, I think, when we got here 5 years ago, we felt like we were 60% of the way to a starting lineup. And I think we've all talked about that in the past. We drafted Dame, and then we experimented the first year, then we found Rolo. And I think this past year, I think we felt like we were closer to the 60 than we really were in a year where the West was, quite honestly, much more competitive than it had been the year prior. But I think getting Yusuf solidifies that position. I think now what we've got to do is figure out the bench and at the other starting positions, is this group capable based on, we don't want to overvalue what we did the last 25 games with Yusuf, but we don't want to undervalue it either. I have some numbers for you guys, and it's not as a sales pitch, it's more just looking at when you trifurcate the season to a degree, pre-All-Star, we had the 13th best offense, we had the 26th best defense. The net was 23rd, right? We were a minus 2.5 net. Post-All-Star with Nurk, we had the third best offense, the 9th best defense. The net was 4th. We were plus 6.6 and went 14-5. And then we went back to, again, being 11th and 15th with him out. So clearly there's an impact. And I don't think it's just about Yusuf in a vacuum. It's what he does for the other guys on the roster. One of the things we talked about in the exit interviews was what he did was, one, it's another place for Dame and CJ to go with the ball. That's a significant threat. So it took pressure off of them. But it also allowed guys like Farouk and Mo and Noah and E.T. to be what they are and not try to be something they're not, which puts them in a danger zone of trying to do too much, which results at times in failure. So I think right there, I think, you've got the key position. You've got point guard and you've got center filled now. We obviously think we have one of the best two guards in the league and CJ that can also play point. And we have a lot of potential with the youth we have at the other spots. And like I said, it's our job internally to track their growth, our confidence level in them, being able to get it done from game one next year. It's been an interesting ride for all you guys that are here. The first two playoff years, we started off great, and then we kind of hit a lull and went into the playoffs and had to start over. The last 2 years, we started slowly and blew up late. And I think one of the things we talked to the players about was, what do we need to do to have this be more consistent game 1 through 82 so that we have the right seeding? One of the things I talked to the guys about was, we're not going to be the only victims of what we saw this last 10 days. Okay? Let's not mistake that. But we don't want to experience it in April. We should not have been in a position where we were dealing with this from April 16th to April 24th. And I think a lot of that was games that we gave away earlier in the year came back to haunt us when we turned it around. We just didn't have enough time to make up the ground to get into a seeding where we had the chance for a more favorable outcome.
What did you see early on as the problem? Why did you guys start so slow?
I don't have the record, Jace. I think, did we start 7-4?
I don't think it was that good.
Wasn't it not? No? I thought it was around there. 7-4. But it wasn't a good 7-4. Do you know what I mean? But I think what happened was we got a little bit of a false positive the way the season ended. Look, we were competing with the Clippers in that series. I mean, look, it was 2-1, and we were up with 6 minutes to go in game 4. So, I'm not going to get carried away with injuries. I don't know that the outcome changes, but I do know we were in that series against an elite team that had championship aspirations. Hey, it fell our way injury-wise, and then we played golden tough, but Steph was beat up. So I don't know that internally we changed our perspective, but I think the players, just naturally start thinking, well, we're a second-round playoff team. And I think everybody got comfortable that we would just pick up immediately where we left off. And I wish we would have started 4-7 instead of 7-4, because I think maybe the wake-up call would have come earlier. And we started off okay record-wise, and we got in this rut. I think you even wrote, Jason, at one point, there's something wrong with the team, even though the record didn't show it. And then, the bottom of the West wasn't running away from anybody. So we never looked up until that one point where he slipped to 10th, where we went, wow, we're on the outside looking in. And we were only outside for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but it happened in February. So I don't think we hit enough adversity early to give us the wake-up call. And I think we were just too comfortable with, we lost 80% of our starting lineup, and suddenly we performed better in the playoffs than we had the year before with a team with higher expectations. So I think that, I don't want to say it was complacency, but I want to say it was a comfort level where guys felt like we can just flip a switch and turn this thing on. And then we went on that trip. You guys remember, we beat Chicago on the road and then lost game after game of one possession basketball. And it just it spiraled. We had a tough travel schedule. We were on the road a lot. We had a lot of back-to-back, and it just snowballed to the point where we never caught our breath. So I think at the All-Star break, it was a great time for everybody to take a break, catch our breath. Everybody got rest. We brought in Nurk. Guys got healthy. The schedule softened for sure. And we came out of the break, even though we went 1-2 out of the break, we were playing better basketball, and we went on the run. So, look, the consistent question to all 15 guys in that room was, instead of where we left off last year and where we started, how do we take how despondent everybody was in that locker room last night and use that 5 months from now when the wounds have healed to make sure it doesn't happen again?
You envision Festus Ezeli being on the roster next year?
No. I mean, we stay in contact with Festus, giving him full organizational support in terms of his rehab, but we can't have that kind of a risk again to have a roster spot at a critical position for someone that we're not, we don't have a body of work with him.
Neil, you talked about improvement coming from existing players that are with you now. Where are we most likely to see that, do you think? I mean, you got the three young guys in Tim and Pat and Jake, and then you have some guys that are still kind of, hopefully, I think, on your part, coming into their own. Where do you see the help coming first?
You know, I think guys like Mo and Myers, you know, still have an upside. Look, clearly they were compensated for their potential. But, you know, again, we're not giving up on anybody. You know, look, I think Mo has shown he can have stretches where he can be a really good player. He's only 23 years old. And even Mo talked about he gets down on himself, you know, pretty easily. He's got to learn to do it. He's got to learn to play at a high energy level more consistently. He's got to bring energy. He's an elite athlete. When he plays plays with his hair on fire, the way he did the last 14 games of last season and in the playoffs, he can be a factor. You know, we've seen flashes from Myers, you know, in the past. We committed to him long-term, contractually. You know, with Myers, it's all confidence. You know, we have guys on our roster that they're not lacking confidence, whether it's justified or not. And with Myers, it's literally a day-to-day process to keep his spirits up when things aren't going the right way, because he doesn't have the kind of confidence and swagger and almost sociopathic you know, approach to the game that other guys do. And he's not the only young big guy, you know, to suffer those kind of, you know, ups and downs. But, you know, I think, you know, everyone has to continue to build trust with him. I think he was probably more excited than anyone for the season to be over to start the offseason. You know, he was one of the main guys that came in that had a very specific plan about where he was going to be, who he was going to work with, where he was going, what he needed to do. And, you know, and I talked to Myers, you know, look, he was our first draft pick, you know, along with Dame and Will. And I said, you know, Myers, like a lot of the distractions you've had in the different off seasons, whether it was getting beaten out or a veteran coming in or an injury or a contract negotiation, don't exist. And you've had 5 years where it's been up and down. Everybody keeps waiting for this breakout. And now you need to spend some time to think about, what do you want your career to be? Because all the other extemporaneous things are gone. They're all gone. And now it's just, this is an off season about basketball and where it fits in your life and what do you need to do. And, you know, to his credit as a mature young, he had answers. He's been thinking about it for a while. I think he knew this season wasn't turning around for him. And he already started making plans for how he can, you know, avoid this kind of a season next year. And part of it's on us, Dwight. I mean, look, we've got to understand that there are some guys that, you know, need more attention than others, and some guys that need a longer rope at times, so that because they're not as easily turned on and off, you know, it affects them more. And I think we all, you know, myself included, you know, from the front office all the way down, have to understand that to get the best out of Myers, he has to believe you believe in him and you trust him.
Neil, are Dame and CJ off limits, or are they like everyone else and open to?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the odds of anything ever coming up of commensurate value for others is so hard to even fathom that it's not. I mean, I can give you the trite answer that nobody's untradeable, you know, but clearly they are.
Was there ever consideration to not chase the playoffs there when you were 11 games under?
Never. You know, and we talk. I think, Dwight, I mean, you've written it. You can't build a winning culture by losing. You know, it was interesting. We were talking last night. I think Terry he's better at all these stats than I am, but I think we're one of only 6 teams in the league to make the playoffs the last 4 years. And that's not to tout it, because finishing 8th and getting beat in the first round in a sweep to Golden isn't something to beat your breast about when you're comparing yourself to Golden and the Spurs and, you know, the upper echelon. But I think if you looked at the reverse of that, and you looked at some teams that have wallowed in the lottery, when you fall back into that and you accept that, it becomes easier to stay there. And look, and I come from an organization where for a lot of years, until Mike Dunleavy came and changed that mindset, it had been decades before they had gotten out of the playoffs. And then when Mike left, you know, we basically took 1 year down with a bunch of young guys, and we're in the playoffs the next year. And they've been in the playoffs 6 straight years. And when you become a winning organization, you expect to win. You know, and on a personal level, you just asked about Dame and CJ. How do you do that? how do you sit here in July and get a guy to extend a contract and commit to you long-term like CJ did and Dame did the year before, and then look them in the eye and say, we'd rather have the 10th pick than the 15th pick? You can't do that. You can't ask them to do that and then come October, turn it on again and go, great, the organization believes in us and we're all in, and not have them looking over their shoulder in February thinking, well, if we have a lull, they're going to bail on us and look for the next guy. So, one, you can't do it ethically. You can't do it for a fan base that sells out that arena every single night. Okay? I mean, when things were at its worst, we were selling. I mean, there were 20 organizations around the league that would have killed to have the gates, right, and the attendance we were having at a time when we were 23 and 33 and underachieving. So you can't do it to them either. But you also can't do it if you wanted to. Unless Dame and CJ were going to go to Fiji for 2 months, I mean, they were going to help. They were going to win games. Guys like Aminu compete, and Mo, and and Evan Turner, who was hurt, wanted to come back and make an impact. So it was never even viable. And honestly, when you look at some of the drafts, I think you and I actually talked about it at one point, right? Well, we lost a bunch of games at the end of 1 year. We had the 10th pick. Go back to that draft with CJ McCollum and redraft that draft. Go back. He was 10th. There's times, ironically, when having a later pick allows you to take a player that maybe conventional wisdom and groupthink dynamic doesn't allow you to take earlier. We've all seen examples of, oh, this guy slipped and now we have to take him, when really your heart was set on someone else. So there's times when maybe it's not even expertise of getting a guy later. It's more about the fact that it gives you the opportunity to take someone without the immediate reaction of how could they reach and how could they take him.
By the same token, did you have to convince them that trading for a first-round pick and a 22-year-old center was not tanking?
It's interesting because I was the one that addressed the team, and look, it was not a popular decision at the time. I mean, because again, not only was Mace the starting center, Ed was hurt. He was beat up at the time. Myers was struggling. We hadn't played Noah at 5 at all, to that point. And I'm going to tell them, hey, we're trading your guy. But we did it. And, and I think Terry made the point, hey, we put ourselves in this position where the organization has to start looking more long-term because of the fact that we haven't performed at the level. Like, if we had been 33 and 23 instead of 23 and 33, I don't know that we make the deal. So on one hand, it gave us as a front office an opportunity to do something that has a better long-term outcome for the organization. But it took the handcuffs off also. Because what was happening, I don't know that we would have, I would like to think we would have turned it around, but I don't know. We had 56 games to turn it around and we hadn't. So, but no, it wasn't popular, but I think one of the things, we're really lucky to have with guys like Dame and CJ, Dame plays with guys that are here to play. And I think Nurk came in, he was ready to compete. He competed at that Utah game right away, end of the break when everybody was on their last legs. And I think they knew they had something. And look, and I while I solicit the opinion of players, I do, because they're the ones that share the court. And I like to know how they feel about guys they play against, how guys are off the floor, how they hear about guys in the locker room. At the end of the day, it's a judgment call, and I have to take responsibility for the ones that don't work out and, try to sell them on the ones that I think will.
What's the formula, going back to Dame and CJ, what's the formula to make that work? Because we all know they're great offensive players, but from a size and defensive standpoint, there are some flaws. So how do you see that making that work?
Yeah, well, and look, it presents a challenge. I don't think it presents a challenge at the point guard position, because either one there, we're not giving up the size we give up, right, at the 2 guard and and on the glass. But it's my job to fortify the other positions to the point where they're not as vulnerable when they're out there together. One of the other things too, and it depends on how Terry handles the rotation, but they don't play the full 36 together. There's a lot of time when we're not as undersized as people think, because AC is at the 2 or Evans at the 2 And I think that, one of the biggest beneficiaries, the two biggest beneficiaries of Nurk from their plus minus was Noah and Mo. And when you look at the starting lineup, suddenly we're not really undersized. I mean, Mo's 6'9". Noah is at or above average size for a power forward, for the teams that are playing smaller. And then Nurk, who's 7 foot 290. So we went from being really small with, Farouk at 4, Mason at 5, which exacerbated, the backcourt, the undersized backcourt, to, okay, we're a little bit undersized at the 2 at the starting lineup, but we're at or above league average in terms of size for position at 3, 4, and 5 now. So I think part of that, I think that's part of it. But I think I look at it like we're really blessed and lucky to have Dame and CJ, understanding it does present some challenges on the defensive end. So it's my job and the job of the guys on my staff to make sure we support them and make them less vulnerable when they share the floor together. And again, look, you look at the numbers, we had a top 10 defense post All-Star break. So, clearly there's ways around it, and we've just got to keep, experimenting. That's why I said, I think, thankfully, before Nurk got hurt, it was at least a 20-game. We had a 25% of the season sample size to work with to help us inform our decisions, not just personnel-wise, but for Terry about how he's going to tinker with the rotation and, maximize guys and their abilities.
Do you envision talking to Yusuf about a contract extension? I know he's up for that, or will you wait until?
We haven't even, I haven't even, thought about it, honestly. I mean, I think everybody's a little raw. It was a weird ride, right? He kind of came in out of nowhere and he blew up and then got hurt. And, we've got to get guys healthy first and get them all back in the gym and again, see what we have. But, me, I don't talk about contract negotiations. I mean, I think even when you saw some of the guys last year, whether it was Mo or Myers, I mean, when we had deals done, we had deals done, but, it didn't play out. It didn't play out in the media, and it really wasn't public.
Neil, whose development excited you the most this year?
I'd say probably Noah, late. And I don't know, Jay said, if it was skill set as much as confidence. He was really good when he played with Nurk. I mean, really good. And I think the thing that is really exciting for us was if you watched that series and his ability to switch pick and roll, I mean, he kept Steph in front of him as well as anybody did, out on an island. His rebounding went up. He was more aggressive. There's still a lot of work to do with his offensive game, so that he's not just a dunker spot, finish, rebounder type guy. But, he's 21 years old. So I think, we just talked to, Noah. There isn't a nicer human being on our team. And he's got to differentiate between being that guy in the locker room and with staff and being around and with the media and everybody else. And, I gave him examples. Elton Brand is one of the most wonderful men I've had the privilege to be around. I coached him. I was in the front office with him. But he played with a smile on his face and everybody liked him. But guys walked away like rubbing their arm or their back or picking themselves up off the floor whenever they went at Elton in the post. And I think that's the jump for Noah, is to understand he's a really good screener. He's a physical offensive player, but he's got to understand when he's got to have a little bit of a mean streak to him and, and be more of a presence in the lane where guys going to the hoop realize they're going to have to deal with him when they get there.
How do you grade or assess Evan Turner this season? He was your big free agent on time.
I felt bad for ET because, he got off to a, so many times the first 10 games are so over magnified, they set the narrative for an 80-game season. He got off to a tough start. I think everybody was expecting, more because of the dollar figure that he had gotten, and he was basically our sole, free agent acquisition. And, when you got past those first dozen games, he really had a good run, and he was playing really well right before he broke his hand. And he was in the starting lineup. We were playing better. He did a phenomenal job guarding point guards. Jason, to your point about taking some pressure off of Dame and CJ, where they don't necessarily have to run 85 pick and rolls a game and guard 85 pick and rolls a game. We don't beat Boston at Boston without him guarding Isaiah. And I forget where we went right after that, but he went right the next night and guarded another point guard. And that was a part of that really good run we had, and then he got hurt. So, I think a lot of Evan is such a high IQ guy that it takes him a little bit to understand where his game fits into the system. And I think this year, Terry was talking about it, not to get too technical, but Terry put in a new series, of something called a 2 series. And Evan really gravitated to it because it was new. And it was the only really new system we put in for the current guys. And they didn't get it at all. and it was this problem that the one thing that Evan really latched onto was that set, that action. And nobody else thrived in it, but he loved running it because he got it. And the other guys were more comfortable running the stuff they'd been running for 3 or 4 years. So I think that's another guy that we're going to have to spend a lot of time in the offseason figuring out, okay, now we know his game. He knows how we play. We're much more read and react maybe than some other places he's been. And that with that freedom comes, he's got to really know and be dialed into our offense and know our play sets and know our personnel, where guys want the ball, right, where they can be successful with the ball. I think we saw a little bit of him playing some 4 late in the year, against the mobile guys where, he could use his handling a little bit more. So, the one thing that I'm really pleased with is, there are things Evan needs to work on, but his versatility is a big asset for us. We have a lot of money invested in a couple of positions, and having a guy that can play basically 4 positions on the floor is something that's going to give us a lot of flexibility in the offseason.
You mentioned flexibility. You look at your financials, and it doesn't look like you have any. And I know this didn't happen by accident. I mean, are you comfortable right now with where you're at?
No, look, we've got to get better. Again, part of the player retention, we've talked, look, we've got draft, trade, free agency, player development. Teams have to weight those differently relative to where their strengths, and weaknesses are. So we don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of free agency, in terms of buying players, but we also projected this was going to be, last summer was a really tough market in that the preponderance of teams with cap room and the number and the limited free agent market. This year, we kind of basically spent 2 years worth of money in 1 year to a certain degree because of the offer sheets and the status, the room was going to go away. And again, to Paul's credit, he wanted to spend every penny worth of money to populate the roster and then match or extend our guys. And a lot of that is, look, I'm hoping that we can believe enough in this roster that it can take the next jump. But, one of the things I think that has gotten lost, and it's not an excuse, it's just this was supposed to be year 2 of a rebuild. And Mike, to your point about what a rebuild, this is not what a rebuild looks like. But the elements of a rebuild are, we lost a lot of veteran players. We lost a multi-year all-star and a franchise player. And instead of going into, well, let's burn up some of Dame's best years and not spend the money and hold on to our cap room and try to, extract assets for it and get high draft picks and lose. We've done something with the youngest. We have the youngest team in the league. So very quietly, we've been rebuilding without having to subject our fans and the guys on our roster whose mindset we care about and commitment to the team we care about to failure. And, so getting them into the playoffs while we're populating the roster with younger guys, and then, we may not have the money to go after another veteran player, but we've got 3 first-round picks. And whether we combine them to move up, combine a couple to move up, if we use them to go get a veteran player, we have tools to improve this roster and continue to build. But like I said, I think when we all sat in here a couple of years ago, and I think our offseason was basically only Ed and Ed and Gerald and Farouk and, Ed and Farouk were only free agents, right? Gerald came via trade with Noah. Mason came via trade with Noah, and we were averaging our age down to get on Dame's career arc. I don't know that anybody would have said, well, would you take the second round of the playoffs and a first-round playoff exit as failure? It's not the success we expected out of ourselves because these guys hold themselves to a much higher standard, and nobody's content with it, and nobody's complacent. But it's also a better result than sitting here saying, hey, everybody get excited, we have the 7th pick in the draft, and you had to suffer through a 50-loss season.
veteran presence in the locker room?
Well, I'll always tell you I miss Kamen. Look, for G, I mean, I think we replaced G with Evan, and we kept guys. But I think it's hard. I agree with you 100%. And we had Earl Watson, right? We had Chris, we had Steve Blake, Jared. But at some point, guys like Dame become, Dame's going in. He's gonna be in his 6th year next year, and he's he's a multi-year all-star. He should be a perennial all-star, but that's up to the coaches, who maybe they should watch a little more tape post all-star break than pre all-star break. But I do, but I also think that the leadership came. There's no better leader than Dame. I mean, veterans, guys like Evan brought that up in the room. He said, what? I said, Ev, what was it? Like, we know we acquired Nurk, and that kind of infused a little bit of energy. And he said, Neil, Dame never gave up on it. Like, every time we came into the locker room thinking, man, that's it. We're 10 out. Now we're in 10th. It was, got to get the next 3. It starts with tonight. And they all knew he was willing to do whatever it took to get him there. And he never stopped working. He never stopped believing, just like a year ago. And I think while the perception for all of us, because we've been with Dame, these 5 years, we remember him as a rookie where he was the young guy. When you bring guys in from the outside, when Farouk and Ed came in, they looked to Dame. When Evan came in with Shabazz, they looked to Dame. So while he's only, in his mid-20s and only in his 5th year in the league, he's perceived differently in terms of his presence, back there. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, it's absolutely fair to say that, look, if I had to do it all over again, the 15th spot, I don't know that Chris could play, but it would have been great to have him around. He and Dame have the most unlikely friendship I've ever seen in all my time in the NBA. And you saw the reaction, anyone that was in the locker room when Chris showed up for those 2 games late. And you wouldn't expect it, right? I mean, based on a guy who basically didn't play his last year, right? I mean, we were in a different mode. I mean, Chris didn't really play until the playoffs, and the excitement to have him back. Look, I wish he would come back and join my staff or join Terry's staff, but there are too many moose elk or whatever it is he's doing, and he's got the kids, and he's back home. But it's great that they bonded with a guy that can come back and so seamlessly stop by and visit, just like the way Steve does. Steve pops in, and but I agree. I mean, look, we have to give some thought to, do we have that guy? But we've got to know, if we do it, is it a guy to kind of be there as almost a player coach, or is it a guy we think can actually bring something on the floor? Because it's 2 different things.
How would you evaluate Terry's job, Neil?
I think Terry did a great job. Like we talk about Dame all the time, I tell you, Terry's consistency is remarkable. I have much higher highs and much lower lows, than Terry does. I do. And I admit it. Look, I do. I'm emotional about this. And it's a long year. And, the hardest thing for me, people always ask when I left coaching, and I don't know, the other guys that are in the front offices now that have coached, is you're not as grounded. You know what I mean? Because you're not in it every day. You don't get to come in every day and get on the floor and feel like you're fixing it. After a loss, you walk in and Terry and his guys are in that front conference room at 8 a.m. figuring out a way to get the next game. You know what I mean? And there aren't that many periods of time that a front office can have a major impact. Once the team is set, okay, you have December 15th, and then trading opens up, but it's rare. And then you get into the trade deadline, and you know what I mean? You just don't feel like you have the same impact. So there's times when you're just basically, the most invested observer in the league. But Terry always brings, he's the same guy. I grew up, I was a huge tennis fan, and would not come as anyone's surprise, I was much more of a McEnroe fan than a Borg fan. But Terry is the Borg guy, right? He's the Swede, he's Edberg, he's Borg. Every day he comes in, he's consistent, and these guys appreciate that. You know what I mean? It's the same way he is with the referees. You don't see Terry with the histrionics and going crazy. I mean, he gets his point across, but in a very respectful manner, and he backs these guys up, and they know that he has their back, and he communicates with them, but he does it one-on-one. He doesn't show players up. You know what I mean? He's not doing it to, hey, everybody, look, this is an excuse because I called the right play and he missed the shot. He doesn't do that. So I think with a young group, knowing every day they're going to come in and they're going to have a coach that is going to be consistent is really important for their growth and development and their confidence.
With redraft picks, you guys can obviously, I don't know, do a lot of different things, but what do you think of this year's draft class?
It's strong. Like I said, I think it's taken on mythic proportions because I think the last few years has been historically weak. I mean, honestly, if you go back and look at the performances of some of the guys where they were drafted relative to what you would normally get on a 20-year sample size out of those draft positions. So I think everybody's really excited about the potential for this class. I think I would say that the most intriguing part of it is the depth. It's a very deep draft. I think you're going to find a lot of quality players, throughout the first round into the second round. I think that's what's exciting for us. Isn't maybe, that one guy, but I think, overall, I think you can have an impact in this draft because not only do we value the depth of the draft, but I think other teams in this league do. And I think as you get closer to it and guys dig in more and they assess their rosters and where they want to go in the future, the value of having the most picks in the first round of any franchise is going to give us some flexibility in terms of making deals to fortify the roster.
What's your evaluation of your guys' culture?
I want to let you know I was completely oblivious to that until someone showed me your tweet, which I said, "What? I don't understand what this means." And then I had to go back and read that. I was glad that it was written by someone who came to 2 games all year, and clearly the motivation was to abuse his privileges as a media person with his past so that he could get tickets for his relatives and pictures taken with the opposing point guard in the opposing point guard's jersey. Because clearly that's an unbiased opinion, right? That's an impartial observer talking about our roster when he has his nephew in a Steph Curry jersey taking pictures with Steph Curry. Sure. Look, I'm very comfortable with where our culture is. I mean, you guys are around it. You're in that locker room more than I am, right? I mean, quite honestly. I mean, you guys. The day I stopped coaching, I haven't walked into an NBA locker room, not once. It's not my place. When I talk to the guys, it's out of the locker room. That's their sanctuary. So you guys know how close a group that is, how they feel about the coaching staff, the support that they get from the organization. They know we have their best interest at heart. Last summer, when we had guys that, their markets didn't appear the way that I think maybe they anticipated they would, they were still taken care of. They wanted to keep here. When you look at guys like, look at Chris Kaman. Look at Steve, guys, how they were treated when they were here relative to maybe some other experiences they had in the league. So, everybody throws the word around. And like I said, I don't hear a lot of complaints. And believe me, we have guys that, any of you that know Chris Kaman, if he had a complaint, he would voice it. And again, like with Dame, hey, what does it tell you about an organization and an owner that when you are in a starting lineup from the day you walked in and 80% of it is not going to return, and on day one you sign on long term? And then your backcourt mate, who is another star in this league, never once said, I want to go somewhere to run my own team. You know what I mean? And signed on. And I think that's where you have to look at it is, and I've talked about this in free agency. Look, I've got to do a better job, selling our program, selling the organization, selling the city when we have the free agent flexibility. But I think what gets lost in that is the guys that have wanted to stay and the guys that wanted to come back. I think you have to look at that also, that we don't have guys, we lost one player.
one thing Dave has talked about, though, as far as culture is he doesn't want to be known as a bunch of nice guys who just work hard.
We just talked about it.
And I guess that's what I was getting at. Like, how do you see that culture and needing to change that part of the culture?
Yeah, and he's right. You know, I think in that area, I think Dame is probably more open to players that, knowing if there are physical limitations, he's not as critical of that as guys that the game doesn't mean as much to them as it does to him. And again, like I said, I think, you know, that's on me to make sure that we find guys, that the guys we bring in here have a competitive instinct and have that in their DNA where, you know, they're going to go to war every night, and Dame knows as much as he pours his heart and soul, and that's not an across the board. I mean, there are guys that they do, and there are other guys that I don't know if it can be learned or if it's just, you know, it's just in your DNA already. But I do know that that is something that it is important to him, that you can't accept losing. And I don't think that we have a lot of guys that do that. But I also think, you know, Jason, that we have a lot of guys that I don't know that they know how to win either. You know, part of the model that we had when we went to go get guys that were maybe undervalued around the league, not necessarily were they coming from winning situations. You know what I mean? So I think it's a double-edged sword. You get guys because they're in places where you see something in them, but it's not translated into winning where they are. They're not integral to winning, but we think they can outperform what they had done historically, you know. But they haven't. They don't also bring the winning mindset. You know, we were just talking to Pat Connaughton, you know, about his future and you know, guys getting ready for summer league. And I said, one of the things you're very lucky in that you've been in the league 2 years, you haven't played a lot, but you know what it takes to win because you've been around a team that has won. And again, maybe not at the level this year we wanted to win at, but you weren't playing for the draft in January. And that will reap benefits down the road. The way that it has, again, guys like CJ, guys like Allen, those guys were a part of teams that won 54 games and advanced in the playoffs. So they don't know any different. They don't know what it takes to play losing basketball. But there's another level we need to get to. And it's as an organization and it's also individually. And I think that's the thing that Dame holds guys to a very high standard with, that he expects guys to work at the level he works, and he expects them for the results of a game to matter as much to them as it does to him.
Neil, with the changes in the CBA that gives you those D-League spots, would you guys consider getting a D-League affiliate of your own?
You know, we've looked at it. You know, it's an ongoing process. In order to maximize it, it's got to be geographically in the right place. You know, when we look and we track the teams that are really successful with the model, there are things we would like to replicate, and it just takes time, you know, to find the right time to do it, where to run the team, what resources to put behind it. Look, and it'll give us a good sample with, are these two-way contracts going to make it more productive? You know, there's arguments either way. There are teams that have developed players because they've had the opportunity to go to the D-League. And then we've developed players because we find a value in having them around our team more. You know, I think we saw it this year. Tim Quarterman, you know, Terry just talked to him, was making great progress with us. And we thought going to the D-League was going to maximize the foundation he had built here. And it actually worked as a setback. You know, Jake, same thing. It ended up being more of a setback. Now, that was sending him to a place that isn't under our direct control. They don't run the same system. It's more challenging. But we still have to figure out where would we put it, right? And how are we going to make sure that these guys don't lose touch with the Portland Trail Blazers? Because there is a value also. One of the we've talked about it. You got to understand also, it's a long year. If you want to rest guys like Dame and CJ and the guys that aren't going to practice every day, there are still rotation guys that need to practice. Well, who are they going to practice against? So unless you can have guys where they can practice here and then go play, you're hurting your main rotation players because they need guys to go against. You know, you can't be the video coordinators. Like, so at some point, if you're going to rest your starters, the guys 6 through 10 need guys to play against, and they need to be in your proximity.
How do you view Harkless's decision near the end of the regular season? He did attempt a three-pointer.
Oh God, good for him. You know, he did enough over 79 games to shoot 35%. I mean, I think when we did the bonus, our deal was, hey, if Mo shoots 35 or better based on where he is in a career, God bless him. He deserves it. And he worked really hard on it. He did it. I think if those 2 games mattered, he would have shot him. But again, it became almost like a running joke. He had earned the bonus. The irony was it just came down to like one shot, right? If he went 0 for 1, he missed it. If he went 1 for 4, he got it back. If he went 2 for 7, he got it back. It just became silly at one point. But again, the fact that Mo worked hard enough to go from where he was, I wish I could give everybody $500,000 to jump up, 6 or 7 percentage points in their three-point shooting. Anybody else? Guys, thank you. I want to thank you. Look, it's a long year, obviously. The travel's arduous. There was a lot of ebbs and flows, throughout the course of the season. Everyone's together quite a bit. And I thought, everything was really fair. I thought we were playing poorly. We were playing poorly. And, and I think Terry's credit, he answered questions, honestly and openly. It got better at the end. You gotta love it. Maybe he did media training. Maybe she told him not to. That's not me. But anyway, thank you. Like I said, hopefully we have an exciting June, a June, July. We keep building the roster, and we're all excited about coming back next year.
When do we start bringing guys in for workouts?
I think the first draft workout's June 7th.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's it.
You good?
Well, that'd be
Really, do I need to start bringing in some non-drafted guys to make you? So you know what? When we decide there's no media availability for draft picks, we're going to blame Mike Richmond. He had to go away. I think it's because, the way that it works out, timing-wise, Chicago, then the withdrawal deadline for NCAA players is, I think it's the 25th. And then all the agents will have their pro days, and they don't like to book guys out before that. And thankfully, Steve Rosenberry and Joe are thrilled because they're like sales reps asking for the PO because we have 3 first-round picks. So now now we're the belle of the ball. Last year we had to sell our soul to get anybody to come in here and work out. So now the agents are finally on our side. So it'll be a sprint because the workouts start later, the draft starts earlier, and like I said, we'll if you don't want to do media availability, we'll kill it. We'll make it the Mike Richmond rule. Does 7 weeks give you enough time, Mike? Is that good?
7 weeks is perfect.
All right, guys. Thank you.